Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our BQA. The question we are going to answer is a question raised by a brother regarding the disturbing event in the life of Prophet Elisha, narrated in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. So let us read the said verses. 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 23 down to 24. Then Elisha went up from Jericho to Bethel. On the way, young boys came out of the city and mocked him and said to him, "Go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head." When he turned around and looked at them, he cursed them in the name of Yahuwah. Then two female bears came out of the woods and tore into pieces 42 of the boys. So our brother's question is, did Elisha cause the 42 boys who mocked him to be mauled by two bears? Actually, for many, this is shocking. They would probably say, why would a man of God put young boys to death for mere mockery? They are just a bunch of kids just acting like kids, and yet Elisha thought that it was appropriate to kill them just because his feelings were hurt. In other words, how could a man of God curse these young boys for such a minor offense? And for those who do not believe in Yahuwah God, they use these verses to accuse Yahuwah as being capricious and unjust. They quickly conclude that Yahuwah promotes and condones unjust killing. For us to better understand the meaning of this event, it is important to examine the historical and cultural context of this story, as well as other passages of the Holy Scriptures. Who is Elisha? In the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19, verse 16. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Avil Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. What we read is an instruction given by Yahuwah God to prophet Elijah. So the answer to our question is, Elisha was the anointed prophet to succeed or to be the successor of prophet Elijah. For us to be able to fully understand the nature of work which Elisha will assume as the anointed successor, let us first know and understand who Prophet Elijah was. The life and work of Prophet Elijah are recorded in the book of 1 Kings chapter 17 and 18, and also in the book of 2 Kings chapters 1 and 2. He was also mentioned several times in the New Testament. Nevertheless, a summary of his life and works is as follows. Elijah was a mighty prophet during the time of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. This is a period when the whole Israel had turned away from Yahuwah to worship false gods. The royal couple required all Israelites to worship Baal and Asherah. Israel, during this period, was a kingdom of idolatry. Consequently, Prophet Elijah was sent to encourage them to return to Yahuwah. He was sent by Yahuwah to wage war against idolatry and to prove the legitimacy of his authority as the anointed prophet, and to prove that Yahuwah is the true God. Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal. 450 of them, and another 400 priests of Asherah to determine whether Yahuwah or Baal was the true God. This event took place on Mount Carmel. Actually, we visited this place in March 2023. Anyway, it was agreed that Elijah and the prophets of Baal would offer a sacrifice on separate altars prepared by each party. But they would not light a fire themselves. The God who could send fire for the sacrifice was the true God. Baal's prophets and Asherah's priests were the first ones to perform. Despite their long, loud, and repeated prayers, fire did not start. In other words, nothing happened with the altar and the sacrifice they prepared. They even cut themselves with swords and spears until they were bleeding all over. But still, nothing happened. Then it was Elijah's turn. Elijah's prayer was immediately answered by Yahuwah. Fire came down from Yahuwah and burned Elijah's sacrifice, including the woods, the stones, and the ground around the altar prepared by him. And all the people who witnessed this happen bowed down to the ground and started saying, Yahuwah is the true God. What happened to the prophets of Baal? Well, they were all killed. So Elisha, being the successor of Elijah, was commissioned to continue fighting the idolaters. It was his mission to destroy and remove idolatry from the people of Israel and to bring them back to Yahuwah God. Why did Elisha go to Bethel? In the book of 1 King, chapter 12, verse 32. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the eighth month, like the feast that was in Judah. And he offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. Before we answer the question, let us first recollect the events that took place prior to the events mentioned in the verse we read. Israel had just been divided by Yahuwah into two kingdoms. The southern kingdom, otherwise known as Kingdom of Judah, the capital of which is Jerusalem. And the northern kingdom, otherwise known as Israel, the capital of which is Bethel. Bethel was not only established to serve as the alternative to Jerusalem, but to serve as the center of idolatry of Israel, the northern kingdom. It is a city where King Jeroboam set up golden calves to serve as the gods of Israel. And in the furtherance of their idolatry, he appointed priests who were not Levites, whose task was to administer their worship. So to answer the question, Elisha went to Bethel to wage war against idolatry, just like his predecessor. He went there to continue the work of Prophet Elijah. It was his mission to bring Israel to Yahuwah God. As mentioned earlier, on his way to Bethel, he was mocked by a group of young boys. Other versions of the Bible use the word children, though a greater number of versions uses group of young boys. This is where the issue starts. Who were these young boys who mocked Elisha? The words used in the original text was katan and naar. In the English language, katan means young or small. Genesis 9:24, 27 and 15. And naar can designate a servant. Genesis 22:3. It can also denote armor bearer. Judges 9:54. But most significantly, it was used to designate priest. 1 Samuel 2:17. Moreover, the words katan and naar were used as a descriptive phrase describing those who mock Elisha. This is the same descriptive phrase used to describe King Solomon when he became king at the age of around 20. 1 Kings 3:7. It was also used to describe Hadad as a mature young Edomite rebel. 1 Kings 11:17. So most likely, those young boys were not kids or children as others would claim. They were either young and or small servants or young and or small priests. They were obviously acolytes or stewards of the idolatrous shrine in Bethel. They were among those appointed and placed by King Jeroboam in Bethel. They were like the prophets of Baal and the priests of Asherah who questioned the legitimacy of Prophet Elijah as a true prophet. How did they mock Elisha? They mocked Elisha by telling him to go up, you bald head. What does go up, you bald head mean? In the book of 1 Kings, chapter 1, verse 18, Elijah was described as Lord of Hair. And in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 3 and 5, he was described as master or chief. So when Elijah was taken to heaven, Elisha was in effect lost his master, for which reason he was called bald head. When the boys told him to go up, after calling him bald head, they were not only making fun of his grief, but they wanted him gone also. We need to remember that these boys who mocked Elisha were either young priests or young servants of idolatry. They did not believe that Elijah went to heaven. Instead, they believed that Elijah died. It was obvious, therefore, that it was their wish or desire that Elisha is dead also. Besides, it was customary at that time for the people to shave their heads when they lost someone they love. When the boys called him bald head, they were making fun of his grief. It was their intention to hurt or offend Elisha's feelings. Furthermore, being bald head at that time is tantamount to affliction with skin disease, particularly leprosy. Those young boys were in effect calling Yahuwah as a useless and powerless God. They were mocking Yahuwah God. These young boys deliberately gathered and located Elisha to convey a strong message. Elisha is not welcome, and Bethel is not a place to worship Yahuwah God. Besides, the sheer number of the mockers and the culture of violence at that time suggests that the criminal propensity of the mockers is very high. In fact, idolaters back then were known of demonstrating uncivilized, unruly, and ungodly behavior. They have unquestionable and extreme devotion to their religion, an indubitable loyalty to their high priest or leader, King Jeroboam in this case. They would do anything and everything to please their king or leader. Today, these are the people described as fanatics. Elisha was in a situation where there was a clear and present danger. The threat was real, the physical harm was imminent. I don't even think that the human rights and the right to life of Elisha were recognized by the mockers. It was really frightening and very alarming in Israel at that time to be faithful to Yahuwah. Even at present time, there are concerns that we should be vigilant of. There are situations in which we can be urgently worried and concerned. Watch this.
Behold, all those who are incensed against you
shall be ashamed and disgraced.
they shall be as nothing.
This priest must explain what exactly they mean by saying they shall be as nothing. To me, I see that as a blanket threat, a threat that is directed to everyone who refuses to submit to their leader. I see that as a complete disregard of life and rights of others whose faith does not align with theirs. It is frightening. They should clarify that. Nevertheless, does Yahuwah God allow his prophets to be harmed? In the book of First Chronicle,
Behold,
chapter 16, verses 21 down to 22. He allowed no man to oppress or exploit them, and he reproved and punished kings for their sakes, saying, do not touch my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm. This is a very stern warning by Yahuwah God to those who would harm his prophets. What will happen to those who will harm Yahuwah's prophets? They will be punished. When Elisha cursed the young boys in the name of Yahuwah, he was in effect asking Yahuwah God to render judgment and impose punishment upon the mockers. It was Yahuwah God who caused the destruction of the young boys. Their destruction was their punishment. Was the punishment excessive or unjust? The answer is no. These boys were as wicked as the prophets of Baal and the priests of Asherah on Mount Carmel. They were not only guilty of harming Elisha, but they were also guilty of rejecting Yahuwah. Was Yahuwah God capricious? The answer is no. Yahuwah God has always been consistent. The punishments for those who rejected him, i.e., idolatry, might have been executed in different forms and ways, but the end has always been the same: death. The punishment imposed by Yahuwah God upon Dathan and his brother Abiram, Korah, On, and all their relatives was death. It was executed by Yahuwah God by opening the earth so that all of them, together with all their loved ones and their possessions, would be swallowed alive. The 250 leaders who were on their side and all their conspirators were consumed by fire sent by Yahuwah God. Everyone was killed. They were punished because they were found guilty of idolatry and for harming the prophet anointed by Yahuwah God. Some may think that the two bears mauling the 42 boys was just an isolated case or a mere coincidence brought about by their carelessness to wander. So the question is, can Yahuwah God really send animals to execute his judgment? In the book of Leviticus, chapter 26, verse 22, I will send animals against you, and they will rob you of your children, your cattle, and make you so few in number that your roads will be deserted. Yahuwah God can use anyone and anything, including animals, to execute his judgment. What happened with the 42 boys in Bethel was a fulfillment of the verse that we read. The punishment received by Queen Jezebel, the idolatrous wife of King Ahab, who was an idolater himself, was death. She was thrown from a window, trampled by horses, her blood spattered the wall on the horses, and her body was eaten by dogs. Her death scene was gruesome. Only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands were left. Likewise, the satraps who harmed Prophet Daniel were thrown into the lion's den together with their wives and children. The lions overpowered them and broke their bones even before they reached the bottom of the den. What is another proof that Yahuwah God uses animals to execute his judgment? The last verse that we are going to read. Revelation chapter 6 verse 8. And I looked up and saw a horse whose color was pale green. Its rider was named Death, and his companion was Grave. These two were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword and famine and diseases and wild animals. What we read is a part of the events that will take place at the end of times. Yahuwah God used animals before, and he will use animals again to execute his judgment. We hope that this lesson has answered our brother's question. Thank you, and may Yahuwah Abba and Yahushua HaMashiach be with you all.